Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. This is going to be episode number 357, and this is a little bit different episode. I actually was interviewed by Sam Ayers of Living Country in the City on episode 41 of his podcast, and we were talking about Coues deer, and I thought I would share this with you guys. I encourage you to go check out Sam's podcast. It's a relatively new podcast, Living Country in the City. He's from Los Angeles, and I think he did a really good job on this interview, and I hope you guys get some value out of it. Guys, I want to thank you for supporting my podcast, and I love getting emails and direct messages from you guys about your hunts and about things that you've learned on this podcast. So continue to keep sending those. You can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com or send me a direct message on my Instagram account at jscottoutdoors. So, guys, I want to thank the sponsors of this podcast. GoHunt.com Insider is offering a 30-day free trial, and that is going to be up here within the next 2 weeks. They are going to be pulling that promotion, but I want to encourage you to go to gohunt.com/jscott to take advantage of the Go Hunt Insider, where you can go and research all the western states, all the animals, harvest statistics, draw odds, etc. It's an unbelievable resource for those of you out there that are applying in all the different states, and the amount of information is incredible. So go to gohunt.com/jscott, follow the prompts. You can take advantage of the 30-day free trial. You get full access as a Go Hunt Insider member and can check it out. I really appreciate them being the title sponsor of this podcast. Guys, I also want to tell you that Coues, the mobile showroom, Coues Ultralight Hunting has a mobile showroom that travels around basically the western U.S. And this week coming up, October 19th through the 21st, they are going to be in my hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. Unfortunately, I won't be there. I'm still in Colorado, but go out and check out the Coues mobile showroom. You can find out the exact details by going to coues.com. But make sure you go out there and say hey to the guys and tell them I sent you. And just want to thank Jason Hairston and his crew at Coues Ultralight Hunting for their sponsorship of this podcast. Also, phonescope.com. If you use the JScott16 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount on all PhoneScope products. Cheston Davis and his company out of Beaver, Utah, they make the best digiscoping, where you can take a phone, any phone, and adapt it to any optic, whether it be a binocular or a spotting scope, and be taking photos and videos immediately. So use the JScott16 promo code, get a 10% discount, and also the Outdoorsman's, the Optics Authority, Cody Nelson and his crew there in Arizona, 1-800-291-8065, or you can go to outdoorsmans.com. If you use the JScott promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount. Guys, I really appreciate your support of this podcast. I'm out here in South Central Colorado. I actually have taken a position as a ranch wildlife and hunt manager during the fall here. We're actually not running any hunts till 2018, but I'm taking a month or so here to take real good inventory of the ranch for both mule deer and elk. I have seen mule deer, elk, bears, turkey. We actually, Hunter Meekum, who's a guide on the ranch who works with me out there, he actually found a mule deer kill, and we set up a stealth cam on the mule deer kill and actually got video that night of the lion coming back to the kill, and she brought two kind of adolescent kittens with her, and it's just been an awesome time out here in Colorado, learning a lot and getting to learn some new country, a beautiful property, and there's lots of adventure in store here. So I'll keep you posted on that. And guys, let's get right into this episode. Thanks for your support.
All right, y'all, welcome to episode 41 of Living Country in the City. Today I'm going to talk Arizona Coues Deer with Jay Scott of the Jay Scott Outdoors podcast. Jay, thanks so much for hopping on the line with me today.
For sure, Sam. I'm looking forward to it. Anytime I can talk Coues Deer, I'm pumped.
So before we get into Coues Deer, I'd love it if you could just give me a little bit of your background, how you got started kind of in the outdoors and hunting.
How I got started, my dad actually ran a ranch in Colorado and took me on my first deer hunt when I was 15, and that was for a mule deer. But I was always a kid that my grandma got me a Field and Stream magazine and Outdoor Life when I was in kindergarten and first and second and third grade, and she would always get that magazine and have it at her house, and I would always read the magazine from cover to cover, and I was the kid that actually, like, in the corner of the magazine, like, pulled the corner down and had little tabs, and I kept all the magazines, and I had, I read Tapley's tips, and I always was trying to figure out how to catch fish, and at that point, being young, I really didn't have anybody to take me hunting or fishing that much, and so I was always a kid that just wanted to be in the outdoors really, really bad, and I wanted to hunt and fish, and I was the kid that, had the little Zebco 33 fishing, spinning type rod on the shore, and would watch the guy go by in the boat and, pull up the stringer of fish when they're going to, and just, I was just craving to be in that boat, and same with hunting, from rabbits to squirrels to deer to anything, to even think that I would someday be a professional elk guide or bighorn sheep or Coues deer. I mean, it was just a dream for me, and so that's how I got my start. And I had some friends kind of in grade school, Jason and Dave Melby, their dad Mark Melby, took me under their wing and took me on hunting trips, and that's kind of where it all started. And then once I got my own wheels when I was 16 and able to drive myself, and that's when it kind of all started, where I had a little bit of freedom to actually do the things that I really, really wanted to do.
So you went from this kid reading your grandma's Field and Streams, and then a little bit older, heading out with your dad, and then some friends for hunting. So what took you then from this young man hunting now to running your own podcast and guiding and really as a professional outdoorsman? Yeah,
really in Arizona with our tag structure, it's sometimes hard to get tags for all the big game species. And really, when I was in college, I got my guide's license, and the reason I got it is because I actually wanted to spend more time out there elk hunting. Originally, it was elk hunting, and I knew that if I got my guide's license, that would give me an opportunity to justify being out there in the woods and enjoying what I loved. And I think I got my guide's license in 1996, something like that. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's been over 20 years now. But really to just give me a longer season and allow me to be out there more is the reason I got my guide's license. And then it just kind of blossomed from there. I loved it. I'm the type of personality that if I jump into it, I jump, both feet, just head first, just dive into it. And up until I think last year, I think I spent, 20 years in a row of taking the entire month of September off, in the elk woods, videoing elk, photographing elk, calling elk, guiding elk, and what have you. And so for me, it's not a job at all. It's what I love. It's everything I think about is hunting and fishing. And, I run a successful real estate business as well. But, the reality is, everything in my thought process usually stems around trying to catch or photograph or, harvest something.
I feel like that's kind of, as far as I've learned, the sign of a real true hunter right there is, it doesn't matter if you're the one pulling the trigger, but just any excuse to be out on that hunt, be out in the woods, be, participating in the life of those animals we all love so much. I feel like that's really the true sign of a hunter.
And I would agree with that. And the older I get, I'm 44 now, the older I get every season that goes by, it seems like I actually want to shoot something myself less. but I get more and more enjoyment out of either my hunting partner or clients or what have you, just being with them and enjoying the camaraderie, the friendships, and what have you of the hunt, and enjoying God's creation. I love being out there. I love the animals. But I would say I don't think I've lost my killer instinct, so to speak. But I definitely, for myself, in being someone that, has to pull the trigger or has to harvest, I come home on so many hunts that are personal hunts that I don't fill a tag, and I have, just as good a time not doing that. And, some look at that as, not being successful, and that's fine. In doing this for as long as I have, I've kind of been on all spectrums of, having to kill something or not, and kind of enjoy where I'm at now, where I truly do trophy hunt. I am selective on what I shoot, and, at times catch criticism for being a trophy hunter, and it's something that I will never, I shouldn't say never say never, but it's something that I don't think I will back down from, because it's just how I go. If I don't see a buck that I feel like is a mature buck, or bull or ram or whatever it may be, like, I can go home without shooting one. It's the end result does not justify if I had a great hunt or not.
Well, and that's one of those funny things is we talk about conservation, and that's an important part of it. Is I've had conversations with friends who either don't really understand hunting or might be kind of leaning against hunting, and I've talked to them and I say, well, these animals have lived long, full lives. It's not a cow in a pen. And they're like, well, how do you know? I'm like, well, you can tell an older animal by, especially a male, typically by the size of its rack and various other things. And I'm like, you can't want us to chase older, animals that have lived these full lives and then also be against trophy hunting. It doesn't work that way. That's kind of how you typically pick those animals out.
Well, I can't really speak for anyone else. I can only speak for the way I do it, but I definitely like to shoot, when it comes down to bucks, whether it be a Coues buck or mule deer or what have you, I like to shoot something maybe that I haven't already shot, got kickers off the, G2s, G3s, maybe got a drop tine, maybe he's wider than any buck I've shot, maybe he's heavier, maybe he's taller, maybe he's only a big 3x3, but he's, got trash off both sides, or, when it comes down to Coues deer, I love, wide bucks, I love narrow bucks, I love bucks, and that's one thing I really like about Coues deer is every rack is unique, and I'm the one that's pulling the trigger, so I'm, the trophy's in the eye of the beholder, and, I can't speak for guys that go out and they just want to, just harvest an animal. That's great. That's what they're out there for, and I try not to judge others. I try and just do what I enjoy and do what I like, and I definitely like going down to the end of the hunt, trying to push myself either physically and mentally, and or both, just trying to harvest the best animal that I can. And sometimes, and a lot of times, and most of the time, it comes down to the end of the hunt and I don't shoot something. And, I think there's a time in every hunter's career or their progress where they need to go through the period of actually killing and harvesting and figuring out how to do it. And they have to have that killer instinct. And then it comes down to, do you get to a point where, you've killed enough stuff and you're just being selective? And that's kind of where I'm at with my own personal hunting career. And I enjoy it. I love it. And I feel like if I was just going out to try and kill a deer and being done every time on the first day, it just wouldn't be as fun. So, I always like to keep it fun and it's a great passion, hunting and fishing of mine for sure.
So, and you've taken that passion, and you are the host of the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. How long have you been doing the podcast?
I want to say the podcast started in February of 2015. My good friends, Giannis Patelis and Stephen Ranello over at the Meat Eater, they actually sent me a copy of their pilot episode, and Giannis, I give him a lot of credit. He's like, Jay, he said, you ought to start your own podcast, talk about Western hunting. He's like, you have quite a bit of experience, and you've been a lot of places and hunted a lot of things, and a lot of people. And it got me thinking. At that point, I really didn't even know what a podcast was, and obviously those guys have taken their podcast and they've gone mainstream. They've got the Netflix. Their TV show is just Steven. He does a phenomenal job as host for the TV show, and Giannis is the producer. And their podcast may ultimately end up being bigger than their TV show. But anyway, they encouraged me, and I started. I was up and running in 2 weeks. Had purchased all the different things to get started, and I just jumped in. I think I'm at 350 episodes now, and it's just the amount of the listenership, the support, the loyalty from my listeners is amazing. I get 15 to 20, whether it's email or direct messages every single day from listeners that either listened to something in the podcast and it encouraged them, or gave them skills from one of the guests that I've had on to help their own hunting and fishing. And to me, that's extremely rewarding. And it's, my wife always laughs because she's like, "You've been doing a podcast for 20 years. I've had to sit and listen to you on the phone talking to, this buddy, that buddy, or people that just call me out of the blue and introduce themselves." And I'm in it to try and help people. It's definitely not a show where I'm trying to showcase what I'm doing or, my merits or my credits. It's about, talking to my guests, trying to pick information out of their brain that I'm curious about, which will make me a better hunter, which then I think translates to, the podcast being fairly informational. And my podcast isn't, it's not one of these big entertaining, podcasts where people are laughing and what have you. It's more of, a lot of information and, maybe to a fault, just trying to get as much information out there to my listeners as I can.
Well, and we kind of talked about this earlier. I came across your podcast kind of early, as I was kind of learning about hunting and stuff like that. And I will admit it was definitely a little intimidating at first because you release a lot of content. I noticed there's some days, you'll release 2 or 3 or 4 episodes, kind of if you're talking about rut reports or breaking down units. It's definitely a lot of content. And now that I understand things a little bit more, I really appreciate all of that because there's always something, okay, I may not be hunting that specific unit, but I may be looking at hunting close by, or I may not be looking at hunting that specific animal in the unit, but there's still definitely tidbits I could get for, if you're talking about elk in a unit, but I was hunting mule deer, there's definitely still things that could apply and crossovers that you could find in there. And like you said, it's just, there's so much info packed into each of these episodes, and I think that's needed. I also enjoy listening to the podcast that, they're funny stories and they're encouraging, but I try and listen to podcasts because I want to learn, I want to get info, I want to grow as a hunter, and I think yours definitely provides a lot of great information for folks. So,
well, I appreciate that.
So, getting into, I guess, our topic of the day, I really got into hunting when I started learning about, well, I shouldn't say we got into hunting, but started getting interested in backcountry hunting when I started learning about elk. And so, honestly, a lot of my research and study has been focused on chasing elk. But I, through actually watching, listening to the Meat Eater podcast and watching the show a lot, I started learning about Coues deer, or Coues deer, as I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit. Started learning more about them, and just I kind of became obsessed with them as well. They're just such a fascinating species. And so maybe you might be able to give us a little introduction of just about the Coues deer and kind of talk a little bit about what they are, what makes them different and unique.
For sure. I mean, when you're talking about Coues deer, now I'm going to say Coues, and it's Coues is how you spell it. The actual pronunciation, you are correct. It was named after a guy named Elliot Coues, who actually designated these deer and classified these deer. Elliot Coues. Most of all my buddies in Arizona say Coues. I do know a handful of people that say cows. Either one is fine. I don't really get into Coues or cows, and there are people that just like refuse to say Coues or refuse to say cows. I'm neither one of those. The Coues deer are an unbelievable animal. They are the cousins of the eastern deer or even the Texas deer, any of the white-tailed deer. They are an unbelievable dainty, small animal. Mature bucks. Sometimes they'll be in that 110 pound range, with a lot of bucks, maybe never even making it to 100 pounds. They're not very tall, but they're an unbelievable wary animal. It seems like mountain lions and coyotes are constantly after these deer, and so of a lot of the animals that I hunt, they are the most wary of all animals. They are the most alert and most keen animals, and so from their small size to their we say lots of times that when they disappear, they've gone underground and they've dug a tunnel and they're just gone. That's just the nature of a Coues deer. And then you take the characteristics of those Coues deer, and with them being small, these big Coues deer that we like to target, the big racked Coues deer, big antlers. When you get a big buck, they look really, really big on those small deer's head. And, there's people out there, I hear it, they're like, oh, why would you like to chase those jackrabbit with horns? And, and that's fine. If you've never experienced it, you can say that all you want. But I have very rarely, we guide in Sonora, Mexico every year. This is, I believe, my 20th season coming up here. And I've very rarely ever taken someone that didn't just really leave with a great respect for those deer, and they're just really pretty deer. And some of the things that I've seen them do, and the aggressiveness, that they chase does with reckless abandon, and they fight other bucks, to the death, and they're just an awesome animal. I would encourage anybody out there that hasn't been on a Coues deer hunt, whether it's in, Arizona, New Mexico, or Sonora, Mexico, even Chihuahua for that matter, northern Mexico, I would highly encourage you to go on a Coues deer hunt because they are an unbelievable animal. And, it's also cool because sometimes you've got overlapping mule deer in the same country, and, specifically in Arizona, you can come and hunt in January with your bow and arrow right during the peak of the rut. I mean, the 1st through the 31st of January, you get 31 days. And, I mean, there's not many animals across this country where you get a full month to hunt them in the peak of the rut. Mm-hmm. Granted, you've got a stick and string, but, I mean, these bucks are losing their mind chasing does and chasing other bucks and, making scrapes and running those scrape lines and what have you. I mean, it gives you a really good opportunity to, for one, see a lot of animals, feel like you're in the middle of the hunt. And if you're so fortunate to find and target a big buck and, be able to hunt one specific buck, which is, we love doing that. It's just one of those things in life that you should experience as a hunter. And beautiful time of year. If you're speaking about January, the rut in Arizona, normally, you've got good weather, and that's one of the things guys that want to come on my Mexico Coues deer hunts, it's beautiful weather. Typically, your lows are in the 30s, with your highs in the high 60s, sometimes even the early 70s, but it cools down overnight, and, you just get to watch them rutting around, and if you're hunting in August when they're in velvet, I don't really spend a lot of time with the Coues deer. Typically, I'm ramping up for elk season, but that's also another time that you can come over the counter in Arizona and hunt for a couple of weeks. I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, and get to chase them around in the velvet. Now, granted, they're a little bit more nocturnal They don't, they're not as visible as they are in January, but just an unbelievable deer. I can't say enough about them. They've really had my heart for over 20 years now, and I'm every bit as fired up about this coming January season down in Sonora, Mexico, as any other season we've had.
Well, that's one of the things that really drew me to chasing them is that, we talked a little bit, you mentioned earlier that, Arizona has some amazing opportunities for hunting, but it can pretty often be difficult to get a tag, or you're spending a lot of years building up points to get tags. And, I know I've just started recently building up points, but one of the things that I love about these winter hunts for the mule deer and the Coues deer is that it doesn't affect your points, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can only harvest one buck per calendar year, but you can hunt your archery tag, and if you don't fill that tag, and if you were to draw a rifle tag, you wouldn't be able to use the rifle tag, but it does not affect your points in any way, meaning you could just apply for points or apply and not draw in Arizona, but buy an archery tag every year over the counter and hunt, and it doesn't affect your points. So I highly encourage people to, one, gather points in as many states as you can, but specifically in Arizona, unfortunately, they don't have a drawing for Coues deer and mule deer. It's just deer, and so you accumulate points for every year that you don't draw. But what I can tell you is you can come out and buy a tag over the counter and hunt in some of the best. Arizona has some of the best public land hunting of any state in the country, because we have, I believe it's 15, I think there's 85% of Arizona is public land. The other 15 is private, and you've got some Indian reservations and some other things like that, but 85% of our state is public land. And so, whether you're talking down south, south of Tucson, Arizona, or in the central Arizona units, either south of Flag or around Payson, you basically have a free run at all the national forest, state ground and BLM ground that we have. And, I would say 99% of the hunting that for Coues deer in Arizona is all on public ground. So all these Arizona bucks that you see getting harvested, I would say 99% of them are on public ground. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand is, they can be from Michigan or from wherever and bring their travel trailer out, or for that matter, fly out and stay in a hotel and be hunting Coues deer, mule deer, with a tag in their pocket, and it doesn't affect their points. If they shoot a deer, yes, if they drew a rifle tag, for that calendar year, they couldn't harvest because you can only shoot one, but it does not affect your points in any way.
No, I definitely love that, because especially, like you said, for someone like me that's just starting out, and, wants to have every opportunity to hunt that they can, but, maybe, well, there's two things, maybe it's difficult to get out, because of vacation time, or maybe it's just, you don't have many points, so you're not drawing a whole lot. It gives a lot of great year-round opportunities, and for someone like me that's already interested in shooting with a stick and string, I'm really passionate about bow hunting. It's definitely not at all a handicap for me, because I was already planning on giving myself some trouble with that anyway. So
yeah, I mean, back to what I was saying, it's a phenomenal time. The weather is usually very, very good compared to a lot of places in the rest of the country. Granted, we can have some cold days and what have you, but cold is relative. When it gets below 60, I'm wearing the biggest parka you've ever seen. I'm a desert rat. So, but like I said, you can hunt Coues deer or mule deer, so it's just an antlered deer tag. You can shoot either or, and you can apply ahead of time and get a javelina for the same unit that you're going to go hunt over-the-counter deer, and have a javelina tag in your pocket. And you can bring your shotgun and shoot, three species of quail. You can shoot the Mearns quail, the scaled quail, and the the gambles. I'm sorry, I just had a brain melt there. But the gambles, the scalies, or the Mearns, and you can, in the afternoon during the day, you can have lunch and go shoot quail. It's an incredible time.
It's such an amazing opportunity, and the thing is you're not really losing out, because if you're applying or you're buying points in Arizona, you've already had to purchase that hunting license. So it's not...
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, you're spending $160 as a non-resident to gain that point. So you already have spent the money for the license. And then I don't know what the over-the-counter deer tag is, but it's not much. I want to say it's like $150, or I don't even know what it is. But it's nominal. It's a nominal amount of money for the enjoyment that you can get out of it. I mean, it's awesome.
Well, and for me, it's more about extending my season and really finding a nice low pressure hunt that I can, just go enjoy and have fun. But for a lot of people, especially if you're new getting into hunting, it really doesn't get too much better than this unless you get lucky with a draw, because like you said, you have so many different opportunities for different types of animal. You've got mule deer, you've got the Coues deer, you've got javelina, and you've got these the dove. And so there's so many opportunities for different types of animal that I feel like you'll get.
Well, I mean, you can predator call. You can shoot with that hunting license. You can shoot coyotes. You can shoot bobcat. You can shoot fox. I mean, you can bring your hand call or your electronic call. I mean, you can shoot. Like we said, you can shoot quail. But let's take a step back. I mean, you have an opportunity to come see the biggest bucks of the year in January and glass up the deer are the most vulnerable. They are out in the open. They are chasing does. They are as exposed as a Coues deer is going to get, and you're able to be on a ridge glassing and find the biggest deer in Arizona are going to come out in January, and you can hunt them for 31 days. I mean, it's a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from how I understand it, I think the late season hunts, you can also get a tag in December.
I believe there are some units from about the 10th or 12th it's usually around the middle of December through December 31st. So it's 2017 now. So coming up in December, there are a bunch of units that you can hunt with your bow as well. Now, once December 31st and it rolls into January 1st, you have to get the new license for the 2018 season. But yes, I mean, in reality, if you wanted to come over from California, you could come over and hunt for basically 45 or a little bit more days in a row and be able to watch the Coues deer rut from beginning to end, from the early stage of, bachelor groups of bucks being together to them kind of starting to spar, to them running their scrape lines, to them breaking apart and, actively pursuing does through the month of January. And then as it tapers off, right towards the end. And sometimes, I get reports of guys seeing bucks really rutting, on into February. So that is true. The season in a bunch of units does start at the end of December. I highly encourage people, if you're going to come over, great if that's the time when you can come over. But if you can come in January around, I would say anywhere from about the 5th to the 25th of January in any unit in Arizona that has Coues deer, that's going to be your, in my mind, best opportunity to see the most activity, to see the most bucks. And in Arizona, the further north you are, if you're up around Flagstaff or up around Payson, the further north you are, typically they're going to rut sooner up there. If you're in southern Arizona, Tucson and below, typically the rut is going to be later, say more into that 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and on in January. So keep that in mind. If you're hunting central Arizona, it's going to be more, after Christmas to the first 15 days of January. And if you're hunting in southern Arizona, it's going to be more, say the 10th through the 31st through the end of the month.
Okay. So now, as you're getting in, I know you're a big proponent of Go Hunt, correct?
Yeah, I've been fortunate. Go Hunt has been the title sponsor of my podcast since I started. About 5 episodes in, Lorenzo Sartini contacted me, and we've had a great partnership and relationship since then. But they're an incredible tool for any Western hunter that wants to research, all the different units in states. And you can go on and you can become a part of the Insider program and basically have access to all the Western states, and you got maps, and you've got all the statistics and draws and harvest data and what have you. So it's a great resource for sure.
So, I go in through Go Hunt, and, I've personally kind of selected a couple units I'm interested in. I won't mention them on the air now, but,
Well, I'm happy to answer. If you've got any questions about units, feel free.
I definitely, we might have a quick discussion after I press the stop recording button here, but hey, I like to spread info, but only so much.
Yeah, I hear you.
But say I've picked out some units I'm interested in. Next step typically for me is, at least I know with the elk hunting, I go in, I start looking at Google Earth and identifying interesting spots that look like they would be holding elk. I kind of know what to look for with elk, and it's those north-facing slopes, looking for water, looking for bedding areas, and I'm sure there's similarities with what you're looking for geographically with these Coues deer, but I'm curious, kind of what would I be looking for as I'm doing my initial maybe scouting online before trying to get boots on the ground?
What I would look for is places. For me, it's all about glassing. It's all about finding those ridges and finding those pointed peaks that you can get up on and you can look 360 degrees. The reason I like 360 degree looks is because at any given time of the day you can be glassing deer. If it's right during the middle of the day, I'm turned and I'm looking with my face into the sun, and I'm looking into the shade. In the mornings, I'm typically scanning when I'm looking into the shade, I'm going slow, I'm going methodical, I'm trying to pick out those deer that are bedded. Conversely, in the mornings, in the evenings, I'm glassing fast, and I'm turned and I'm looking at, sometimes more of the sunny side of the hills and the more open parts where I'm catching deer moving through. And so I really like to find cone knobs. I like to find knobs that I can look in every direction by just basically swiveling on my butt and changing direction. The other thing is I like those big ridges where I can walk a long ridge and glass off both sides, because it gives you the ability, like I said, to look into the thick and look into the open. Typically in Arizona, our south-facing slopes are going to be more of that yellow grass, more open. You look on the north-facing slopes, you're going to get some of that thicker, whether it be oak or mesquite or ocotillo or what have you. But for sure, to me, Coues deer hunting is all about glassing. And that's one thing. I'm a glasser. I love glassing. I love looking at big country. And I've learned that if I can go high, and the higher I can get, the better it's going to be. I typically find the highest points that I can, not necessarily some giant mountain out in the middle of nowhere and it's got no other mountains, but any little cone knob or peak where I can see into a bunch of country, that's what I'm going to pick. So when I look at a topo map, I'm trying to find either those cone peak points, and I'm trying to find long ridge lines. And in, southern Arizona, historically, there's tons of those big, long finger ridges that, you could walk for a mile or even 2, and it's, fairly steep, but by just moving very little, bouncing from side to side and making a day out of it, bouncing back and forth from either the sunny side or the shady side, back and forth, covering as much country with my eyes and my binoculars as I can. trying to find deer, establish a pattern, see what they're doing, watch them bed down, and then try and make your move as an archer. A lot of times you have to do a lot of observing before you can be successful in stalking. But I think it all stems from finding those places on the map where, you can see a lot of country, and then actually getting boots on the ground. I use Google Earth a lot. And sometimes you get up on those points and you're like, nope, I got to check this one off the list. It's just not right. It's not looking in. It's too far away. It's too close. Doesn't look into the country like I want. But if I get to a new area, and this goes for elk, this goes for mule deer, this goes for Coues deer, pretty much anything. I'm trying to get up high where I give myself the best vantage to see with my eyes.
And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give this tip away. I learned it from a buddy of mine, but I'm about to totally give away his little Google Earth secret. We kind of found this little trick where, a lot of the time, if you're just searching in Google Earth and it's not super clear all the time where those little ridges are, if you're in some really flat country, he's started, you just create like a big hexagon and you attach it to the ground and you start moving it slowly up the elevation. You shoot it way up in the sky and you start moving it slowly down and you see those spots where the land just breaks through that hexagon layer. And it's a really quick visual way for you to find some of those glassing points. And then you can kind of dig in a little bit deeper and look at the topo map and see how good they actually look. But it was a little trick he showed me, and I may get a dirty look from him now that I just gave it away.
Right.
But
he'll get over it. But there's also a tool where you can look at the ground view. So when you find one, you pull it down and put, the ground level view, and you can actually pull it down and sit yourself on that point or on that ridge, and you get the actual virtual what you're looking at. So you get the real view of if you go to that point, and then you can spin it around 360 like I'm talking. And I work on Google Earth all the time, and I've found it to be very effective. I'm also very efficient with a topo map, but to me, Google Earth is an amazing tool, and if you're not using it, you're really missing out. It's free. We have so many great resources right at our fingertips that a lot of guys, 30 years ago, never had. So I would highly encourage guys to definitely use stuff like Google Earth. But, back to your question of for Coues deer, it's all about you have to be able to find them with your eyes in order to be effective, year after year after year on bucks. Plus, it's really fun to get up and see, 20, 30, 40, 50 deer and even more in a day or even a morning, because you've picked out a good spot and that's part of working country over. My partner, guiding partner, Dar Colburn, and I'm a hunting partner. We just love picking apart country. We love learning new country. And, we pick out these knobs. He glasses off one, I glass off another, and we, get together at midday and, what'd you see? Well, I saw this, and this, and okay, this knob kind of stunk. Let's go over here and check a new knob out. And that's one thing, over-the-counter Coues deer hunting, or even mule deer hunting for that matter. I mean, you get to be in some amazing country, and you get to go, hike with a flashlight in the dark, and I love that. I love putting on a headlamp and just walking through and getting up to a knob and watching the sun come up and being up there in the dark and just watching everything unfold. It's awesome.
Well, you mentioned kind of the key of, like you said, being successful with the Coues deer is being able to glass them up and see them. And, I think one thing we didn't really talk about is there, you kind of mentioned they just disappear on you. And, I mean, that has a lot to do with their coloring, because don't they just, I mean, they pretty much match the earth identically. They've kind of evolved in that way where their coloring just makes them invisible until they're running away from you.
Yeah, I mean, every year it happens where I'm with a client, and even with some guys that are really experienced Coues deer hunters, and found some deer, and your buddy comes over and you're sitting next to them, and you look in your binos and they're on a tripod in a stationary position, and you just had them centered in your binos, and then you start trying to explain, and then you look back in your binos and you can't find the deer. And you're looking and looking and looking, and panic starts setting in, and like a minute and a half later, all of a sudden you see an ear flick, or you see them just turn their head, and they were standing there the whole time. And that's, for me, one of the things that intrigues me so much about Coues deer is they do blend in amazingly well with the landscape, and they're just an awesome deer. I mean, and not that a mule deer doesn't, but a mule deer is a bigger animal. Mule deer typically doesn't blend in near as well, but these Coues deer, sometimes the grass is over their back, and you're looking sometimes 2 miles away, and even further with some of these big binoculars we use. I mean, it's amazing. A sunny hillside, the deer standing completely still facing you or butt to you, and you look away for a second, you look back and you think he's gone, and then you realize he's standing right there. He's never even moved. Those are animals that I want to hunt.
It's funny. It's one of those things I've kind of described that exact thing to people, and I'm like, oh man, they're just so fascinating. Like, and they sit there, and for them, that makes it so unappealing to hunt them. They're like, oh my gosh, that sounds awful, and you just get this teeny little deer out of it. I'm like, well,
yeah, I mean,
but that's what makes it cool for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, a lot of people will never get lots of things that we do, and we won't get lots of things that they do. And I'm kind of over trying to I want to help everybody out there and help them to be the best hunter or fisherman that they can be. But I'm kind of one of those that if they don't get it, that's their deal, and I'm sorry that they don't get it. Most everyone that comes with me and spends the day with me, especially looking at Coues deer, they leave saying, wow, that was an experience I'll never forget. And so, if you can't explain that or convey that to people, in my mind, they're missing out, and I just move on and take people that do appreciate it and what have you. But, it's not for everyone. Hunting's not for everyone. Fishing's not for everyone. Specifically Coues deer is not for everyone. But I will say it's got a place that's deep in my heart, and I love those little buggers, and I hope to never have to miss a Coues deer season for sure.
Well, you know what? That just means more Coues deer for us, right? If people don't want to hunt.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So what's the typical kind of behavior throughout the day for Coues deer, as far as is it similar to something like elk, where they feed and drink early in the through the night, or early in the morning, late in the evening, and then try and find a spot to bed midday? Is that pretty standard kind of behavior?
I mean, if you're taking out of the equation temperature, you're taking out of the equation moon, you're taking out of the equation, rut cycle and what have you, they're like anything else. They want to eat, and they want to sleep, they want to drink, and they want to, live comfortably. They don't want to get chased by lions. Specifically, Coues deer typically are going to be on the sunny side of the hills in the morning when it first comes up. They're thin-skinned, so they need as much warmth as they can. You need to watch that if you are hunting in January and we have some of a cold snap that comes through. A lot of times they won't get up out of their bed until 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. That's a little bit different than Midwest white-tailed deer, where you've got situations where the colder the better, and the more they're on their feet. Coues deer are actually thin-skinned, and they will actually conserve energy by laying and being bedded, and then once that sun has come up and it's warmed up enough, they'll actually stand in the sun and try and warm their bodies. But they're like anything else. They're going to try and fill their bellies up, and then they're going to try and stay alive. And a lot of that means that they have to, surprisingly, sometimes they bed right in the open where they can see. If there's a lot of lions working some country, they like to get where they can bed right in the open and they can look in every direction. A lot of times they'll bed with their buddies, 2 or 3, 4 other bucks, and everyone's looking in a different direction. And, at the drop of a hat, they could be up, jumped up and running at full sprint, because they're being chased every day by predators. But, day in and day out, let's say a January hunt, as it warms throughout the day, typically they're going to go find shade. So they're going to be up on ridge tops and areas where they can be on the sunny side, and then, walk 50 to 100 yards, and all of a sudden they're on the fixed side. And so finding those contour breaks in those areas where they get sun and they get shade with a very little movement, that's usually a good tip that people can take to find more deer. And, they can become nocturnal when the moon is really high, really full. They can, feed, and then they lay up, for the first 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in the morning, they lay up. And then sometimes right during midday, sometimes when it's the hottest and you wouldn't think anything would be up, they're up feeding, and then they're back down. So I like hunting Coues deer the most when it's darker moons. I don't like to hunt them as much in the full moon period. So, you have to watch that. Your deer sightings will go down. If you're kind of a sun up to 9 o'clock glasser, and then you go back to camp, and then you come back out at, 4 o'clock to dark, if you're hunting during a full moon or a bright moon, you're going to see less deer. You're best off during a full moon to glass from 11 to 2 o'clock, and you'll probably see more deer during a full moon right during the day. Now, a dark moon, best times are probably going to be from sunup till about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then it's going to be from about, 2 hours before the sun goes down, so morning and afternoon.
Okay. So what kind of difference in behavior are we going to see moving from more early in the season into that January rut that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if you can pick if I had to say a 10-day window, and this goes just a blanket across Arizona for the best rutting, I would say it's probably somewhere from the 10th to the 20th of January. Obviously, you have to take that, where I was talking about before, the further north you are, it might be 5 days earlier. Further south, it might be 5 days later. For us down in Sonora, Mexico, that 15th through the 25th, that window is the best time. But to answer your question, like pre-rut, like after Christmas, early January, you're going to see, bucks on the move. And one of the we do hunts in Sonora, Mexico after Christmas, around that Christmas time, and you typically can see quite a few bucks. Usually they're kind of on their own and they're moving. And, you may see a big giant buck and he's just walking, and he never stops. Whereas in the peak of the rut, they get a little bit more where they're with does and chasing actual does around on a hillside. So you've got quite a bit of commotion when you're glassing in your binoculars and you're catching does, flagging and raising their tail and running off and trotting. Just keep watching. All of a sudden a buck comes out of the brush. Whereas, around Christmas time, you might just catch a lone buck and he's just walking and he goes, in your life and out of your life in 5 minutes, and you never find him again because he's just on a rut walk, and he's just going either from where he spent, 11 months out of the year they spend in a certain amount of country, and then that month period of the rut, they typically leave and go to an area where they like to rut. Not always. Some bucks rut right where they live their whole life. Coues deer in general are very habitual and they're very small home range. But Richard Ockenfeld's Arizona Game and Fish did a study, this is probably 20 years ago, and showed they did collared some deer and what have you, and it showed that deer live 11 months out of the year. Most Coues deer live, within an 800 yard circle, and once the rut hits, those bucks, could go 5, 10, 15 miles away. And so you have to keep in mind that, that Christmas time, late December, early January, you could just get bucks just traveling. And then once they kind of find does and they get in their area where they want to rut, then they become a little bit more centralized, and you can kind of find a buck that's rutting But with that being said, sometimes they check those does, and either those does are not, in or what have you, or they already breed those does and they move on to find other does. So, it's definitely kind of a complex issue, but I would try and be in Arizona during the peak of the rut when they're chasing and rutting the most.
Okay. Let's see. Totally. I just caught myself like completely just listening to what you were saying and forgetting that I'm kind of interviewing you.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Oh, my
wife might argue that I put everybody to sleep.
No, I'm like sitting here, and that's the bad thing about doing these interviews, and like especially when it's something, it's a little bit easier when I'm just kind of interviewing someone about themselves, keeping that conversation going. But when I'm like asking about stuff I really want to learn about, and then I start focusing, and I'm like taking notes and stuff, and then all of a sudden I realize, I should probably ask another question.
That was one of the things I had to learn as a podcaster, is like I always, and I still do, I feel the urge that I have to keep the conversation going. And what I've found lately is sometimes I have to listen to what someone's saying, and then there might be a 2-minute period where I'm kind of gathering my thoughts and thinking. So, feel free.
Okay. So what else do we got? We talked about the rut a little bit. We talked about glassing areas to look for.
Talk about equipment if you want.
Yeah, that might be good. Specifically talking about these late season hunts. I'm kind of used to more preparing for thick timber and going in chasing elk. Usually where I was going in Idaho, there's always plenty of water. What kind of differences, what kind of equipment is a little more critical for, say, one of these late season?
Well, for me, that's easy to answer, Sam. I'm a firm believer of using a pair of binoculars on a tripod. I would even tell you that if you're going to come Coues deer hunt with me and you don't bring a tripod, don't even come. It's that important to me that you have a tripod. If you do not glass for Coues deer if you're not using a tripod, you are going to see 10% of the deer that I'm going to see where I'm sitting stationary on a tripod. I'm going to see 90% more deer than you are. I don't care if you are a good glasser. You cannot handhold effectively and glass Coues deer. You will miss tons and tons of deer. So you people listening, you have to have a tripod if you're coming to Arizona to hunt Coues deer, period. I would rather you have that than a release on your bow. You have to have a tripod. Now, I'm going to say that 10-power binoculars are a minimum. 12s are great. Love the Swarovski 15. A lot of us Arizona guys use a lot of the big binoculars, whether it be the Coues or the Swarovski BTX or, I like the Swarovski, the twin spotting scopes, where I can be up on those cone knobs that we were talking about or up on those ridge lines. And sometimes I'm looking anywhere from, 300 to 400 yards, and I'm looking out to 3 or 4 or 5 miles. Mm-hmm. And with the sun at your back and in certain situations, I can spot a buck out there in mountain ranges that, like a lot of times, Dar will be like, why are you even looking over there? That's not even in our unit. You're looking on, in a completely, we're going to have to get in the truck and drive for an hour, that type of thing to get over there. But you have to have a tripod and you have to have good binoculars in order to be effective as a Coues deer hunter, because like we said, they are small and they do blend in very well. So having a tripod is mandatory. And then having, I like the Outdoorsman's mounting system where they can mount your binoculars to the tripod so that your binoculars are sturdy and they're not wobbling. If you have any wobble or any shake or vibration, you are going to miss deer. So once you sit on your butt, once you're behind a tripod, you're looking through your binoculars. I recommend a 15 power. I love the Swaros. I love the Swarovski binoculars. And just glass until you can't glass anymore, and then glass some more. And, just sit and glass, and then, move over to another point, sit there for an hour or two and glass. There's some points I'll sit all day from sun up to sundown in one spot and glass. And then there'll be times when maybe I pack up my backpack and I hike over a mile and get on another point and just 360 glass in every direction. And then the next thing comes with a spotting scope. Once you find a buck, sometimes when they're far enough away, and when you get to where you've shot a bunch of Coues deer, you want to be able to nitpick them and look at them and, decipher and decide what they are. And that's when a good spotting scope. I use the Swarovski 95 millimeter. It's got the 30 to 70 eyepiece, and I can really zoom that thing in and tell you what kind of buck we're looking at. But 100%, if you don't have a spotting scope, that's okay. But you have to have a good set of binoculars, at least 10 power, and a tripod.
So would you recommend then, if you have both, I've got some binoculars and then I've got a decent spotting scope. Would you recommend bringing both and starting with the binoculars, then just using the spotting scope to get in a little bit closer, like you said, nitpick?
Yeah, I would never. I would never use a spotting scope to just sit up on a point and glass around. I'm always glassing with both eyes, and then I'm always using a spotting scope to just identify what I've found with my binoculars. I'm saying this is what works for me, and I'm very adamant about it. If your plan is to go up and just kind of handhold your binoculars and then just, scan around with your spotting scope, that is a no-no for me. I would rather see you just take your 15 power or just your 10 powers and look with both eyes and look steady and be scanning around slowly, methodically, picking apart the country. Then, I get up to the point and then I just one eye it up there with the spotting scope. You cannot look through one eye for very long effectively for Coues deer. So I use the spotting scope for identifying whether it's a buck that I want to go after or not. Or even more elementary than that, I identify, is it a buck or is it a doe? And I tell people, if you're looking through 15 power binoculars, especially Swarovskis, and you're sitting behind 15s and you're looking, out to 2 miles with 15s, you will be able to tell whether it's a buck or not. If you can't tell if it's a buck, it's probably a spike. Those binoculars are so good that you should be able to determine if it's a pretty good buck. But then the spotting scope, that's when you come and you're like, okay, how big of a buck is it? How long is each point? Okay, what type of buck? Is it a 70, 80, 90, 100, 110? What is that buck?
So, talking about glassing, as you're scanning through, I know everyone kind of has their own different methods for glassing a ridge or whatever that may be, whether they're gridding it or going in rows. Do you have any, what's the method that you use when you're glassing? And then with that, do you have any tips, other than obviously just kind of having a trained eye for it? Are there any tips you can give for being able to pick out those details when you're looking?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you've got to glass methodically. You've got to glass slow. Whenever I'm not seeing deer, I tell myself, slow down. And usually very, very quickly after I say slow down, I find deer. Dar and I have gotten to be very efficient, very good glassers, and we can find stuff very, very quickly. And we a lot of people watch us glass and they think we glass very, very fast, which we do at times. But then there's also times when we slow down and we pick apart every little bush and just sit there and let your eyes focus on that bush and just look for any movement, and then just barely move your tripod your tripod head and your binos move to the next bush, and you're just letting your eyes swim around, and you're looking for anything that's going to stick out, whether it's a piece of antler, whether it's an ear, whether it's a black nose, whether it's the cinnamon tail, whether it's the dark spots on their, scent glands on the backs of their legs, or the white on the inside of their legs. You get to where you pick out those things that I would give from kind of a beginner standpoint, slow down. Now, I will tell you, at sunup and when the sun is going down, you want to be scanning just back and forth, open areas, thick areas, just back and forth. There's always been this thing, you want to use a method, a grid. I'm not much into the grid. I think the grid has actually slowed a lot of people down. I think they've actually not found as many deer as they should have. I think when the sun is coming up, you need to be very active and panning. I start usually at the top of the hill, and I pan back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like I'm sweeping it with a paintbrush, okay? Mm-hmm. Once I covered that, I move over to the next little piece of country. I sweep it with a paintbrush. I usually always start at the top and go back, left to right, right to left, right, just back and forth all the way down. Then I move up. And then as the sun gets higher, as 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, then I slow down, and then I start focusing on shadows. And I start staring into the shadows, and I'm looking for deer that are bedded. So I'm looking for the shape of the deer's ears out, and I'm looking for, their head. I'm looking for that black nose. I'm looking for, characteristics of a deer standing in the shade and feeding. So I go from a very fast glassing lots of open saddles, open areas, to then focusing and slowing way down and going methodically. I think if you go methodically and do too much of a grid at first light, you're going to cover so little country that you're not going to catch that buck that's just topping through a saddle, or a doe that's being chased by a buck that's, like 5, 10 degrees off to the right, because you're just doing this, grid. I more think of it as a paintbrush, and just paint the hill, move to the next one, start at the top, paint the next hill, and then as the morning progresses, slow down.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because in those mornings and evenings when you're a little bit limited by how the light's changing, you're limited by the time they're going to be moving, and because they are moving, you're more likely to catch them when you have a broader stroke, if you will, versus you have that broad strokes when they're bedded. It's not going to. You're not as.
You'll miss them when you're bedded. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, think of it as like a net. You're casting a broad net, or you're casting a small net. There's times for both, but definitely, I'm not a fan of the grid at first and last light. I'm a fan of just sweeping. Now, I thoroughly hit all of the country. You don't want to leave spots that you don't hit, but you want to hit them fairly quickly, scan back and forth, and just keep moving. I found that to be very, very effective.
And now, kind of you were pointing out, you almost want to be focusing in when you're really getting into those details, during those times when they'll be bedded more likely. You're looking more for characteristics. You're not looking in your mind expecting to see, look, oh, there's a deer.
A whole deer.
You're looking like, oh, there's like a hoof, or there's a
I'm looking for that black
tip.
Nose. It's amazing how you catch an ear flick. So to answer your question, when I'm slowing down and it's more looking into the shadows, I'm looking for any movement. A lot of times I pick up a bird, I pick up a rabbit. I'm like, nope, that's a rabbit. Any little movement. So my eyes are, I'm for one, you got to kind of shade your eyes, put a shirt over your head, and you got to get into your glasses. And you don't need to be talking. You need to be focused. You need to be looking for any little flick or any little movement. You'll pick up a little bit of wind blowing. You'll think, oh, that's a deer. Nope, it's just a little branch. But you get kind of into it, and get your eyes covered where you're totally into your binoculars, where you don't have glare coming in, and in one day you'll start knowing. As soon as you see your first deer, you're like, okay, that's what a deer looks like. Okay, that's what a Coues deer looks like. Okay, that's a Coues deer doe. That's a Coues deer buck. Okay, I kind of got the size down. I kind of got the shape down. I kind of got the color down. And the more you see, the better you'll get at picking stuff out.
So you're out there, you glass up your first deer, or you glass up your 80th deer for that trip, but you see that buck that you really want to go after, and you're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna hunt this sucker down. He's mine. What challenges would you say with a spot and stock situation with Coues would you face that might be different from maybe muleys or elk or other animals?
The biggest thing is as you're stalking in on the animal, you can't see them. So like an elk or a mule deer that have a much bigger body, a lot of times you can move in on them and be, as you're moving, pull up your binoculars. Yep, he's still there. Yep, he's still there. Yep, he's still there. Most of the time with the Coues deer, they're so small you can't see them. So here's a few tips. I'm a big observer. I'm watching. I find a buck that I want to shoot. I don't do anything. I sit there and usually watch him for at least a good hour. What is that buck doing? Is he about to bed down? Is he walking? Is he slowing down? Is he about to leave? Does he have does? Is he by himself? I'm taking in as much information as I can. Now, in my opinion, when Coues deer are on their feet, that is not the time to be stalking. The time to be stalking is when they're bedded, because usually once they bed, they'll hold there for quite a while, and they'll hole up. So if you're hunting by yourself, it can be extremely difficult and extremely frustrating because, we're talking kind of big country, and by the time you get over to the deer that you're trying to stalk, he's gone. Or you walk right up 10 yards from him, you're thinking, he's gone. All of a sudden he jumps up, he was there the whole time. So if you can hunt these deer with a partner, I highly recommend it. I always say, if you find a buck you want to kill, do not take your eyes off the buck. When you're hunting by yourself, there's no way to do that, okay? So what I would do if I'm hunting by myself is I would watch the deer and watch him bed down, wait till it gets warm, and you're convinced that that's where he's going to bed for a couple of hours, which is usually the case during the middle of the day. Now, they may get up once or twice during the day and reposition with the shade or what have you, or feed for just a minute and bed back down. But typically, they're kind of moving around in the morning, and then for 2 or 3, 4 hours during the day, they're kind of bedded up. So if you're by yourself, I'm going to be looking at landmarks, trees, rocks, colored trees, forked trees, dead trees, anything that once I get over there, it all changes once you leave that spot. So you have to actually pinpoint, take a picture with your phone. The deer is right here. If you have a buddy, that's where you can become extremely effective, whether you're going to use hand signals or radios or texting or whatever you're going to use. And that, communication during hunting is a whole nother subject. But if you're hunting with a buddy, I highly encourage you to put your buddy down, put him behind the tripod. And anyone that hunts with me, they know this. If you put me on a buck and you're going to go stalk it, I will not take my eye off that deer ever. And that's why Dar and I work so well as hunting and guiding partners is I know that if he's watching a buck for me and I'm either stalking or moving over with the client, I know that if that deer even so much as moves, Dar's going to see it. So you have to have a hunting partner that's totally committed to your best interest. Not, I had to take a leak, or, I had to get something out of my pack, or, I had to take a little nap and I'm tired, or whatever. It doesn't work. If you want to become efficient at killing these deer, never take your eyes off a buck you want to kill. If you want to kill that buck, you cannot take your eyes off it. If your buddy is sitting there watching, whether he's giving you hand signals or you have, the orange hat means he's up or whatever it may be, or you have a radio and he says the buck is up, You have to have someone that's totally committed to the whole day. It doesn't matter if rain, hail, what comes, that deer is going to be in those binos the entire time. And if you can do that, your level of efficiency goes way up, being able to get pretty close to that deer and be able to harvest them.
So do you have any favorite stories or favorite moments from a stalk on a Coues buck?
You know, I would say, darn, I've had so many great hunts over the last 20 years, chasing these deer. You know, we had one of a long time ago. Our backs are never the same. We did a big backpack hunt, back in some really, really rough country, and Dar had gone in there a couple weeks beforehand scouting and found this buck that he thought was like a 105-inch buck. But one of the things that was really cool is it was a really wide deer. And I want to say it was close to 19 or 20 inches wide. And we went back in there, Dar had a general season tag, and we packed in there and looked for that deer, and that deer had just moved a little bit, and we ended up hiking up on the ridge the deer was on, and I ended up glassing him up off the other side, and Dar was able to get down there, and he made a great stalk that evening, and got the deer killed, and that was it was like a 105-inch deer, and then we nearly broke our backs coming out of there and what have you, because the country was really, really rough. That was a fun time. And then, you know, there's been a bunch of big deer that we've killed together. You know, one of my biggest regrets in my Coues deer is, you know, the biggest deer I've ever killed myself. Dar wasn't with me. We hunted in Mexico for a buck and hunted him for a full week and never saw him. We only saw a few deer. It was a very low density area, and I was able to go back a week later by myself, and Dar wasn't with me. And had a couple Mexican guys from the ranch with me and what have you. And so one of the regrets is the biggest deer I've ever killed, Dar wasn't with me, but we've had so many great encounters. And, you know, as good as Arizona is, you know, I know this podcast about over-the-counter deer hunting in Arizona. We've had some unbelievable adventures in Sonora, Mexico, which for me is a whole another level of the difference in Mexico and Arizona is you just see a lot more bucks, and you're hunting these big ranches, and it's not public land, it's private land, but you're in these what I would call deer sanctuaries where, you know, nobody's messing with the deer, and you don't have some of the struggles that you have with some of the public land hunting, and you get to hunt and see more bucks. That's one benefit to Mexico, but I'm just trying to think if there's any. We've just been on so many great bucks, and we, you know, one thing. It's always great to have a hunting partner that's totally committed. And Dar and I work together. We truly are more happy for the other person, and we've gotten in some severe arguments over who's going to shoot a buck. He'll find a buck and say, "Here's a buck for you," and I say, "I'm not shooting it. I'm not shooting it." Back and forth. You're going to shoot it. No, I'm not going to shoot it. So if you can ever get to a point where you find a hunting partner that's more happy for you if you shoot something big, that's truly a place that I love. You know, having a hunting partner which you can enjoy that kind of success, because, you know, we come home on a lot of hunts empty-handed where we're hunting for a certain buck, and, you know, if that buck doesn't present itself, we go home without one. And you know, you've got to have someone that's committed to you know, to the hunt for sure.
So, is there any other maybe pieces of gear or any other little tips and tricks that we may not have covered that you think are would be useful or critical for someone going out on their first Coues hunt to know?
You know, I would say for sure have a good pair of boots. You know, keep your feet. It's a lot like sheep hunting. You know, there's a lot of rough country. There's a lot of rocks that are, you know, unstable terrain and what have you. And there's a lot of thorns and stuff. So, you know, have a good pair of boots, good pair of binoculars, great backpacks. You know, there's I'm a fan of Coues and use a lot of their products. Have, the lightest weight gear you can have, and layer up, because you're going from, say 20s, 30s in the morning to, maybe 70 during the day. So make sure you're layering. And, backpacking for Coues, I always tell people, try and, on these general rifle seasons, I tell people, get a mile away from the road and you're going to find more bucks. In those over-the-counter January hunts, sometimes that's not necessarily the truth, because a lot of the does are close to the water. A lot of the water's close to the roads, because they've built tanks and water sources, and, the bucks come to the does. So that's not as important, in January. But good equipment, buy as good equipment as you can afford. I've had binoculars for 10, 12, 15 years. I try and buy Swarovski. I'm a firm believer, of Swarovski binoculars. Try and buy high quality, something that's going to last you a long time. I'd rather spend more money on something than to buy a new set every other year because they're breaking or the quality isn't as good. I don't know if that answers your question, but good boots, good backpack, lightweight stuff, and try and do some backpacking if you can. That's always fun to, sleep on a ridge and get up right from your tent and be glassing Coues deer right out of your tent. It's always a great time.
Well, there's one thing you mentioned that I think definitely warrants just reiteration is I feel like in Arizona, you're probably going to run into a wider temperature extremes throughout the day, especially in the winter. So, like you said, layering is really important. Being prepared to be able to pull off that hood or hat or whatever you're wearing and shed some of that heat, or whether it's your jackets, your base layer, like however you need to do it. It's not it's not some of this high country and the Rockies where you're where you're going from 30s to 50s throughout the day. It's going to be a lot wider of a temperature. For
sure, yeah. I mean, you're 20s to 70s usually, and so you have to have. I wear the Coues Super Down jacket while I'm glassing, the Super Down pants, have them with me, and then during the middle of the day, you can't even believe that you had your Super Down on or your Super Down pants, and then the sun starts to go down, and you get that last bit of glassing till dark, and you're sitting there freezing your butt off, and you put your Super Down back. So it's like there is a huge temperature range, but I'm a firm believer in buying the best gear that you can afford. There's a reason most of the gear is fairly expensive, because it's good stuff, and they use high quality materials. If you just go venturing out into the Coues deer woods with a bunch of cotton stuff that you got at Walmart, I mean, you're going to get cold. And if you add any bit of rain or snow or sleet, I mean, you're going to risk hypothermia and some of those different things. So there's a lot of great companies out there. I'm a firm believer in Coues and their ultralight hunting gear, and having a good pair of pants. You bust through quite a bit of brush and what have you. You get that cheap stuff. It's going to tear. It's going to rip. I want to encourage everyone out there, definitely come to Arizona, bring your bow, come out and experience the Coues deer rut. And the other thing is the mule deer are rutting at the same time. You hear of the Arizona Strip and the mule deer rutting in November and on the Kaibab, which is true. They rut in November. But the rest of the state, our deer rut in the end of December and January. So you can hunt Coues deer and mule deer with your bow at the same time. Mule deer are typically a little bit lower in elevation, but you can be hunting in those same areas where you're seeing Coues and muleys, and take your pick, whether you're stalking a muley or a Coues. It's a phenomenal time to be in the state of Arizona.
Well, like we said, that just gives a new hunter so many more opportunities. Someone that they may just be looking for anything, whether it's a doe or a buck, or just anything maybe with antlers, or it gives you a lot more opportunities. You probably get a lot more action. You have great opportunities, like we talked about, to throw in some other animals too. So I think this is one hunt that I'm really glad I learned about, and I really think a lot of new hunters would find valuable.
Yeah, and bring your shotgun, shoot some quail while you're at it.
So, as we're winding down, I always like to end with a little bit of advice. So, as we mentioned earlier, this podcast is directed at folks that are new to hunting, getting into it, or possibly from the city and may not have access to a lot of the resources other folks have, and just possibly may feel intimidated by going on their first hunt or getting started in hunting. What kind of words of advice might you give that person?
First and foremost, enjoy it. Try and set your hunt up to be as enjoyable as possible. Don't try and put so much pressure on yourself that if you get a deer, it's success, and if you don't get a deer, it's not success. Enjoy the whole process. We were talking about Google Earth. We're talking about, gear prep. We're talking about all that stuff. Enjoy everything about it. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. If you want to send me an email and ask me questions, or if you want to send Sam an email and ask him questions, we've all started from somewhere. Don't be intimidated by, I shot a buck and it's just a 2-point and everyone's going to think it's a dink or whatever. Everybody has their own level of, success or what they should shoot as a trophy. Quit worrying about what everybody else is thinking. Just focus on enjoying the process. And if you can do that, a lot of times you really get into the hunt, everything about the hunt. And for me, the older I get, the more I enjoy the whole process and just the thrill of the hunt. And I'm excited to get up in the morning, and I'm as excited now as I was when I started. I'm probably even more into it. And it's not about the end result. It's not about killing a 105-inch buck or a 110-inch buck or a 100-inch buck. It's about going out and enjoying God's creation and going out and, pushing yourself physically and mentally. And when it gets tough, being able to just sit there and say, you know what, I glassed all day and I finally found that buck. And for me, that's what it's all about. You can sit there and the sun is just beating on you, and your part of you is just saying, listen, I should just get out of here. I should just leave. And then you just stick it out, and boom, the buck flicks his ear, and you've got the buck, and, it's a big giant buck, and it's the one you're after. So, it's one of those things that just enjoy the hunt.
So if people wanted to reach out, what's the best place to find the podcast, see the content you're putting out online?
jscottoutdoors.com is my website. I'm pretty active on Instagram, jscottoutdoors on Instagram, also on Facebook. Come check out the podcast. You can find it through iTunes, J. Scott Outdoors Podcast, or on my website. And feel free to send me a direct message on Instagram or send me an email at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have about any Western hunting.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to post up links to all those on our show notes page. That's going to be livingcountryinthecity.com/41. Thank you so much for hopping on, Jay. I know you've had a busy day out hunting this morning. What are you out chasing today?
Elk. I'm actually in Colorado. A friend of mine bought a ranch here in Colorado, and I'm helping him take inventory on the ranch and actually kind of the hunt manager of this property. And so it's a 40,000 acre ranch. And so actually I'm headed out right now to go scout for elk. So I'm just right in the middle of it for sure.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time away from scouting and hopping on. So thank you so much again.
All right, buddy. Sounds good. God bless you, okay?